You do not wake up one morning and suddenly become frail. It starts years earlier, quietly, with a slow loss of strength, balance, and the ability to do ordinary things without thinking. And most people never see it coming, because the biology behind it begins while you still feel basically fine. I am Dr. Steve Collins, and what I want to tell you today is not about the headline diseases, not cancer, not heart disease, not dementia. Those matter, but there is another version of aging that most people never think about until it is too late. This one takes your independence first. It is the moment carrying groceries feels strangely heavy, the moment stairs start negotiating with you, the moment getting out of a chair stops being automatic. That sounds minor, right up until it is not, and then it becomes everything. Here is what almost nobody tells you. That process does not begin in your 80s. It begins in your 30s and 40s, while you are busy, while you assume there is plenty of time to fix it later. There is not. So let us talk about what is actually happening inside your body, and what you can do about it before the window closes. Protein is the raw material for a huge amount of what keeps you alive. Muscle is built from it. So is collagen, the structural mesh holding skin, tendons, and ligaments together. Hormones depend on it. Antibodies depend on it. Enzymes depend on it. Even insulin is a protein. And insulin is part traffic control, part storage signal, directing where energy goes. When that signaling goes wrong, metabolic health starts drifting. Slowly, quietly. Your body is breaking proteins down and rebuilding them every single day, continuously. It is a construction and repair site that never closes, and that process depends on amino acids arriving often enough to keep everything maintained. So what happens when protein stays too low for too long? The body does not politely wait. It starts pulling amino acids from its own tissue, and the easiest place to pull from is muscle. That is the first hard truth. Muscle is not just movement tissue. It is your amino acid reserve, your metabolic shock absorber, your reserve capacity when stress hits. When intake is too low, your body raids that reserve to protect more urgent systems. As a short-term response, that is smart biology. As a chronic pattern, it is a slow dismantling of the machinery you will need most when life gets difficult. After around your 30s, muscle mass starts drifting downward if nothing interrupts it. Year to year, the change is subtle. That is exactly why it is dangerous. You do not notice it until the compound effect becomes impossible to ignore. This is where the conversation shifts. We are not just talking about appearance. We are talking about sarcopenia, the state where muscle mass and strength drop low enough to cause real-world harm. And that harm is not abstract. It is falls, fractures, losing the ability to recover after illness, being unable to get yourself off the floor. It is turning a manageable health event into a life-changing one because reserve capacity is simply gone. Here is what the research tells us. Low muscle mass in older adults is linked with a meaningfully higher risk of death over the following decade. But there is a distinction that matters enormously. A body that can use muscle is what protects you, not tissue sitting on a scan. Strength is function. Function is independence. And independence is one of the clearest markers of whether aging is going well or not. So when we talk about preserving muscle, we are really talking about protecting your future resilience, reducing the odds that one infection, one fall, one bad surgery knocks you into a decline you never fully climb out of. And yet most people still think the official protein recommendation is the right target. It is not. It is a floor, a minimum to avoid obvious deficiency in a sedentary adult. That is a very different question from optimal aging. Preventing deficiency is not the same as supporting strength, recovery, metabolic health, and function over decades. Those are much higher performance tasks, and they require significantly more raw material. For adults trying to preserve muscle and age well, the research points towards something closer to double the old minimum. That gap is exactly why so many people believe they are eating enough, when they probably are not. But here is something that surprises people. This is not just about muscle. Protein directly affects appetite, blood sugar handling, and what researchers call metabolic flexibility, your body's ability to switch between fuel sources efficiently. When that works well, your system is more stable, less chaotic, less driven by constant hunger and energy crashes. And this brings us to one of the most important ideas in this entire conversation. Maybe your hunger is not a character flaw. Maybe it is a signal. Research suggests the body has a strong drive to reach a protein target, not just a calorie target, a protein target. So if your meals are built from foods that are calorie dense but protein light, Your hunger may stay switched on even after you have eaten plenty of energy. Your body is still searching for the building material it expected and never really got. Think about the modern food environment for a second. Ultra-processed foods are easy, engineered, and hyper-palatable. They deliver energy fast, but they often deliver very little protein relative to that energy. Hunger keeps circling because the protein signal is still incomplete. So when somebody feels constantly pulled toward the cupboard, constantly unable to stay full, one interpretation is not weakness. One interpretation is that the body is trying to close a protein gap in a food environment designed to hide the answer. Have you noticed how someone can eat a large amount of processed food and still feel unsatisfied an hour later? That is not random. That is a clue. And once that pattern sits on top of low muscle mass and insulin resistance, the trajectory gets worse fast. Muscle is one of the major tissues responsible for disposing of glucose. It improves insulin sensitivity. Lose enough of it, and the whole metabolic picture becomes harder to manage. Insulin resistance means cells stop responding properly to insulin signal. Glucose control worsens. Fat storage becomes easier. Inflammation rises. And then visceral fat enters the story. The fat packed around organs, metabolically active, releasing inflammatory signals that worsen insulin resistance further. The fire and the traffic jam start feeding each other, and what often happens next is that you end up treating symptoms one at a time while the deeper pattern keeps progressing underneath. More blood sugar issues, more blood pressure issues, less movement, worse recovery, lower mood, poorer sleep, another prescription, then another. Protein is not a magic solution. Not every chronic illness is a protein problem. But inadequate protein, low resistance training, poor sleep, and a diet built around refined calories, together, create a biological environment where decline becomes far more likely. The opposite is also true. People who stay stronger later in life tend to have protected muscle, protected function, and better metabolic control. That is not luck. That is physiology responding to repeated inputs over years. So how do we actually use this? First, protein needs to become something you build meals around deliberately, not something you hope appears by accident. Animal foods tend to be the most efficient sources because they are dense and contain all essential amino acids. Plant foods can absolutely work too, but they require more planning and more variety to cover everything you need. That is not ideology. It is practical nutrition science. But quantity is only part of the story. Timing matters more than most people realize. There appears to be a practical ceiling on how much protein any one meal can direct toward muscle repair efficiently. So, distribution across the day matters enormously. Spreading protein across 3 or 4 meals is not the same as loading everything into one dinner at night. Your body responds to repeated signals. It needs repeated opportunities to repair. This is why breakfast matters so much. A protein-poor breakfast sets up a day of unstable appetite and poor energy. A protein-anchored breakfast changes the hormonal tone of the next several hours and makes the whole day easier to control. So ask yourself honestly, what does your first meal usually look like? Does it calm hunger, or does it start the chase? If breakfast is mostly refined starch with very little protein, you are beginning the day with a weak satiety signal. Shift that to eggs, yogurt, cottage cheese, fish, or a thoughtful plant-based equivalent, and appetite often becomes significantly more manageable, almost immediately. Now the other half of the equation. Protein without resistance training is incomplete, and resistance training without enough protein is incomplete. These are not separate conversations. They are a matched pair. Loading muscle creates microscopic stress that signals repair and adaptation. The body responds by rebuilding stronger tissue, if the raw materials are there. Give the muscle a reason to stay, then give it the amino acids to rebuild. Resistance training matters at every age, not just for younger people focused on aesthetics. The capacity to adapt does not vanish as you get older. In many ways, it becomes more important, because the cost of losing muscle keeps rising. A couple of focus sessions a week can meaningfully change the trajectory, and the benefits extend far beyond muscle. Better insulin sensitivity, better bone loading, lower visceral fat, better blood pressure control, better long-term function. There is also something called BDNF, a growth support signal for the brain that increases with exercise. It supports neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and rewire, which means strength training is not just body maintenance, it may be part of brain protection too. So this is not a physique conversation. This is a survival with quality conversation. Muscle in midlife is not vanity tissue. It is reserve. It is optionality. It is what gives you room to absorb stress without collapsing into frailty. And frailty is not inevitable. That is one of the most important things I can tell you. Aging happens, but the decline in function can be slowed, resisted, and in many cases meaningfully improved if you intervene early enough and consistently enough. What you do in your 40s and 50s shows up later. The meal choices, the training habits, the protein distribution, the body composition, the inflammatory load, the recovery capacity, it all compounds, in one direction or the other. The big diseases matter, but the quieter loss of strength may be the thing that decides how those diseases play out, how you recover from them, and whether you keep your independence when life gets hard. If you have been under-eating protein for years, this is your signal to pay attention. Not with panic, with strategy. Because the people who lose independence rarely saw it coming when the process first began. By the time frailty is visible, the biology has already been moving for years. And the real question was never whether aging happens. The question is whether, right now, today, you are building reserve, or losing it.